You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestel. This week on Mysteries and Monsters, I'm delighted to be joined by Amanda Woomer, who's better known to many as the creative powerhouse behind Spook Eats. Amanda's Haunted Atlas of New York garnered a lot of positivity with its refreshing take on her local haunted locations across the state of New York. With another 4 books following close behind, Amanda shows no signs of slowing down with her latest project, the Feminine Macabre, a new biannual collection of articles by female authors, investigators, and more. We dive into that, as well as touching on Amanda's love of the paranormal and the charming collection of first-hand accounts included in her latest book, The Ghosts of the Ghostlight Theatre, as well as ruminating on why certain eras seem to produce more ghosts than others. And we both ponder, where on earth are the ghosts of disco? A big thank you to Amanda for joining me, and you can find all the relative links that we discuss in this week's show notes if you want to find out more. As always, you can support the show by signing up for Patreon for just $4 a month. In this week's show notes, for early access to the weekly episodes, bonus shows, and much more. As always, we are on all social media platforms. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and please subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Thank you as always to Dean Bestall for this week's show art, Brennan Storr for producing the show, and also Mysteries and Monsters is delighted to be a part of the Straight Up Strange network. Now, let's join Amanda for some spooky conversation. This week on Mysteries and Monsters, I'm delighted to be joined by Amanda Woomer, the creator and driving force behind the marvellous Spook Eats series of books and website. Alongside this, Amanda is starting a new biannual journal highlighting women in the paranormal, as well as continuing to plan her next series of adventures for Spook Eats this year. Amanda, I'm delighted to welcome you to Mysteries and Monsters. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. I know we were just joking off air. You know, we're very thankful for having hobbies in these strange and weird times, especially as lovers of the paranormal. This is probably the most frustrating period we can probably remember.
It's definitely been a struggle, especially like with Spook Eats. I travel to haunted restaurants and there are no restaurants to go to right now, so it's been interesting trying to keep finding different projects to work on to keep myself sane and to keep Spook Eats going.
Absolutely, because I think one of the great aspects of your work and the field that it comes from is that it's quite a unique take on the paranormal, because I think very often we get lots of guides to haunted establishments and things like that, but there's a real sort of quality that takes your work to a different kind of place, for my opinion, because it's a bit of history, it's a bit of culture, and it's a bit of the paranormal all mixed up into a real hodgepodge of quality writing.
Well, thank you. And that's what I always say to people is, you know, Spook Eats is nice because there's something hopefully for everyone. You know, if you're not interested in the paranormal and the ghost stories of these locations, well, you know, you might be more interested in the food or the history. And if you're not into history, well, there's that travel aspect. So there's, you know, all these little different puzzle pieces that go together to create Spook Eats as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's one of those things, I think, that a lot of people tend to sort of cast their eyes to far-flung places. For you, obviously, because Haunted Atlas of New York is essentially a guide to your doorstep. So was that a deliberate starting point for you to sort of say, well, why not simply start where I am? These are the areas I know the best. Let's see what's around here and take it from there.
Pretty much. So when I first decided that I wanted to try to publish a book, I had all of these visions of grandeur in my mind, like, oh, maybe New Orleans or, London, all like, let's travel the world and, highlight these locations. And like, that's great and all, but I realized I don't have time to travel to these locations, and I don't have the money necessarily to travel to these locations for extended periods of time to really research the history and the culture of the area. So I kind of turned to my backyard, Western New York, where I've been familiar with the history over the years because, number one, I'm a history nerd more than anything else. So I've always been very familiar with my area's history. And, that was a huge part was, write what you know and what you're familiar with, and then from there you can kind of grow over the years. But another reason why, which is kind of what you touched upon, I'm a huge proponent of you don't have to seek out the really, really big and infamous locations that you might see on TV. There are haunted locations in your hometown or in your city. You don't have to, traverse the wide open world trying to find these haunted locations when you can just go down the road to the local restaurant or a local pub or bar where there's just as much history and, tons of ghost stories. So, I always encourage people to really look at the history of their area because you might be surprised to find that it's just as fascinating as the big ticket items that you might, be sold by different groups and television shows.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think often we're in danger of actually missing what's straight in front of us when we look, cast our eyes afar and miss out on some wonderful and unique stories that, are a stone's throw away.
Absolutely. And I could be just because I'm a history nerd, but whenever I'm researching a location and it's nearby, it's part of my personal history and my personal culture. So there's more of a connection as opposed to something that might be in, California or China, these far-flung places that you don't really have any connection to. Whereas if you really learn the history and the ghost stories and the folklore of your area, I just think it's just a bit more, special in a way because you have that personal connection with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's got a more of an emotive response when it's local.
Exactly.
So, and the thing is as well, New York is a pretty big state, and I think sometimes, I remember once seeing a review of you and somebody seemed to not be aware that New York is a state as well as the name of a city.
The city.
So I was a bit surprised when he was like, well, this book starts with talking about Buffalo. Do you not know where Buffalo is? So I was really interested in that because, once again, I love collections like the Haunted Atlas of New York because it takes me to places that I may only have heard of a famous haunting any specific location. And your book just shows such a variety of different places and different locations that can claim to have some kind of spooky connection.
And that was my goal with writing the Haunted Atlas, was to create a guidebook essentially to these locations. I've gotten some negative feedback because people complain that it's not a book full of ghost stories. It's just they describe it as a yellow pages for haunted locations. And I want to be like, do you know what an atlas is? It's fine, whatever. I'm not bitter. But that was my whole point, was to create a travel book. And, so many times, you talk to people that they only acknowledge or understand or accept paranormal theories or ideas that they've been told, again, usually through the internet or through television shows. And my hope with this was that people would, get up off the couch, go out their door, and seek these places out for themselves so that they could come to their own conclusions about what they might think a haunting could potentially be. So, my hope is that people go on a paranormal adventure with all of my books, but especially the Haunted Atlas. It was the very first book I did. It's huge. It's over 130 locations, ranging from, obviously, the restaurants and the hotels that I specialize in, as well as cemeteries and roads and hospitals and schools and even, cryptids. So if people are looking for a guidebook or yellow pages for haunted locations, the Haunted Atlas is definitely, it's a fun book. I enjoy it. I'm not just saying that because I wrote it. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And like you say, I think that one of the great aspects is that if you have the opportunity to go to the state, you can basically say, right, well, I'm here. Where can I go? What can I do? And you can actually kind of create your own little spiritual ghost adventure around a location that you may find yourself in for 2 or 3 days, rather than simply trying to get on a local ghost tour if you don't drop on the right days.
Exactly. And that's like my dream someday. My goal is to be able to have plenty of books out that highlight different states and these haunted locations that they can go to, especially the restaurants, the bars, and the hotels. Again, that's what Spook Eats is all about. And I always joke saying, whenever you're traveling somewhere, wherever you are, you have to eat. So why not eat in a haunted historic building as opposed to some random chain restaurant that's the same everywhere you go? So that's my dream someday, is that people can be like, oh, well, I'm going to Florida. Let's pick up the Spook Eats book on Florida and find a restaurant or bar near where we're staying. So hopefully someday I'll get more books out there.
Well, absolutely, and I look forward to that. I think that's an erstwhile achievement to aim for, really, and all power to you for wanting to achieve that. And I certainly would look forward to any kind of guide you create, Amanda, based on your current body of work.
Thank you.
I mean, what was it that drew you into the paranormal? Because I think for a lot of people, we've all got kind of different experiences and different interests that did it. Because what I was really taken aback, like I say, the Haunted Atlas is a hell of a first book to create, because it's not a small book either, as you refer to. There's 130 locations. It's a hefty tome, and it's well worth every penny.
Yeah, that ended up being much bigger than I intended it to be. Originally, I was like, oh, it'll be a book that you can, like, throw in your backpack or, like, fold up and put in your back pocket and, like, travel with. No, it's like I had to work it out so it wasn't, like, 600 pages long and the size of, like, a Harry Potter book. Basically, I first started getting interested in the paranormal when I was a little kid. I had my first paranormal encounter when I was 7 years old, and immediately after that, I was very much intrigued by what I had experienced. So obviously this was before the internet. So I went to the library and worked with the librarian, and she got me all of these books on, ghosts and UFOs and cryptids, all those fun, wacky, strange things. And, I read up on it. And then when I was a teenager, a lot of the ghost hunting shows started coming out on TV. And that just kind of added fuel to the fire. My parents would take me and my brother to different cities, like Salem and Gettysburg, places that have kind of like that spooky claim to fame. And so we would go there on family vacations. And again, that would just add to, you would hear about the ghost stories, or you would go on a ghost tour. And that was around when I was probably like 14, 15 years old was when I first started kind of quote unquote ghost hunting. You'd get like the tape recorder and, try to do an EVP session, and totally dating myself by saying tape recorder and not digital recorder. Oh gosh. But, so it was a very innocent curiosity for me, as I was going through kind of exploring the paranormal. But in 2015, my younger brother, Jed, he ended up passing away from a battle with pediatric cancer. And that was the turning point for me. It was no longer an innocent curiosity where, I was curious about the encounter that I had as a child. It was more so about really trying to find proof that life continues after you die in one way or another. So that's when I really started investigating. But I found that as I was trying to investigate locations, that a lot of them are very difficult to access, at least here in the States. They're either very, very expensive to get into, or you have to be a part of a relatively well-known established team. And it got me thinking that I can't be the only person that's ever lost a loved one and wanted to explore the paranormal to try to come to conclusions about life after death. So that's when I turned to the haunted hospitality. These restaurants and these bars and hotels that they're already open to the general public. They want you to come and visit them. And for the price of, a pint of beer or an appetizer or even, an overnight stay, you could potentially have just as amazing of a paranormal encounter at one of these locations that you might in a haunted hospital or a haunted orphanage or jail. And a lot of times they're much more enjoyable to experience. There's heat and electricity and plumbing, to name a few.
Yeah.
So for me, that was really kind of the start of Spook Eats, was, losing my brother and wanting to try to create a guide, again, for people to be able to use, so again, they can go on their own adventures and come to their own conclusions. So yeah, kind of a downer, but that's, I always say, with my brother passing away, if I have to look for a silver lining, and being able to start Spook Eats and being able to kind of help people have their own paranormal journeys and come to their own conclusions and find those answers for themselves. I'm not going to say it's necessarily worth it. I would say, forget Spook Eats. I don't need it. I don't want it, if it meant having my brother back. But if I have to find a silver lining, that's it.
Oh, well, yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with everything you've said there, Amanda. I mean, it is remarkable as well when I've heard you mention this a few times as well. It's quite odd, especially being a Brit, because obviously over here, every pub, it seems, says, come in, we're very haunted, come and meet our ghost. And I was very interested to hear that in the States, your experience seems to be quite the opposite of that, and I think often we can get a skewed version of how we think establishments in the States are, because we've seen so many ghost story shows and ghost investigation shows, and we presume that every bar's going, oh yeah, come and meet our ghosts, and every hotel says, come and stay in the haunted rooms, and yet I think the reality is quite a lot of them don't want to talk about what they've got going on because they think it's bad for business.
100%, and it drives me crazy. It just drives me crazy. When I was first starting Spook Eats, I would reach out to all of these locations, again, in the Western New York, Buffalo area, and they would have these reputations for decades of being haunted. And I would reach out and explain, my business angle and if I could stop by and maybe talk to someone. And a few times I got responses ranging from no thank you to kind of a slap on the wrist and a scolding, that places just were not interested in talking about it. They didn't want to highlight their paranormal activity. It was bad for business. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I can't imagine someone who's not into the paranormal hearing about a place being haunted wouldn't go in. But if you have someone that is interested in the paranormal and they find out that a place is haunted, they're totally gonna go. So I feel like it would be good for business, but I'm not a business owner. I don't know. But but I found, when I was over in the UK back in 2019, I was so overwhelmed with the number of pubs that said most haunted pub. On the street there would be 6 of them that said most haunted pub in York, and you'd be like, but the one right next door is the most haunted pub in York. I'll be the one to decide, and you go to all of them. but it was such a breath of fresh air, because I feel like there is a revolution kind of happening here in America where there's definitely places are definitely embracing their history a bit more now, instead of knocking buildings down to build something new or just a parking lot. That's changing, thank goodness. But when I was over in Britain, I was just so excited to find so many of these historic buildings still standing, first of all, and still acting as a pub or a tavern or a hotel. It was just so nice. And you would go to a location and they would say, this pub was built in, 1413, but it's not the oldest in town. And of course I would be like, oh no, of course. Why would it be? Like 1400s. We have nothing like that over here in the States. So I just so respect how you guys handle your history and your haunted history. That it's kind of like they go hand in hand with each other over in Britain. Whereas I feel like here in America, we're still, I think, trying to figure out how we're handling our history and our ghost stories that go with those historic locations. So we're definitely experiencing growing pains, for sure. for sure. But I'm hoping to eventually kind of get to where you guys are, where it's totally embraced. It's not something to be afraid of, or, a hush-hush, oh no, we don't want to talk about that taboo subject. So I am hopeful that things are starting to change, but we'll see.
Yeah, well, just to make you feel even sicker, when we were allowed to go to work before the pandemic, my work pub, because obviously being a Brit, we all have a work pub.
Of course.
Yes, absolutely, where we would decamp occasionally on a Friday evening after a hard week's work, was built in the 1450.
Oh my gosh, see?
And it's still there. It's called the Old Queen's Head, and it's a beautiful Tudor timber-built building that's still there. It has a couple of resident ghosts. So that's where we go on a Friday night to start our weekends, Amanda.
I love it. Oh, so jealous. I'm so jealous.
So, I mean, and that alone, most major cities in the UK have one of those kind of pubs. Nottingham has the Jerusalem, which is, centuries old. And obviously,
amazing.
Which is fabulous. And another one I've had the pleasure of visiting, and a lovely establishment it is too. And obviously, I've heard you mention going to York as well, which is a place I know quite well. I've spent a lot of time in York and had the pleasure of visiting many of its hostelries, because obviously York is also famous for having 365 pubs, one for every day of the year. Which is, a hell of an achievement if you can tick all those off, I would suspect.
Right? That's impressive.
Absolutely. And obviously one of my favourite spooky pubs in York is a place called the Golden Fleece, which is a very odd pub. Primarily, I don't know if they were still there when you visited it, Amanda, but you've got those strange sort of death masks in the hallway and a skeleton sat in the back bar and things like that.
Yes. I talk about, whenever people ask me, like, what's the strangest place you've ever eaten at? And I'm like, the Golden Fleece. It's so weird, but I love it.
Yeah, and like you say, York's that kind of place where every other pub seems to say, no, that's not as haunted as ours is. Come on in and meet our ghost Bill.
Yep. And I'm like, yes, please, I will do so gladly.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to say, if you're going to decamp to anywhere in the UK and try and enjoy as many ghosts in as short a distance, York's probably the best place to start.
Yeah, probably. According to them, they're the most haunted city in Europe.
Oh,
so
let's not start that argument. I got an email the other week talking about York being more haunted than somewhere in Scotland, and it didn't go down well with Scotland. But anyway, I digress. So, you've got a new project in the fire, which is something quite exciting. So, do you want to just give us a kind of overview of what you're wanting to do and what you've got planned coming up this year? Not that you need anything else to keep you busy, Amanda, at the moment.
Sure. So we are starting a brand new project called the Feminine Macabre. Basically, this is an all-new, all-female paranormal journal. And it's something that I've kind of been toying with for the last 6 or 7 months or so. I was doing an interview on a radio show, and we were talking about women in the paranormal, historically speaking. And as I was mentioning different women's names, nothing was hitting with anyone. I was like, it was like throwing darts at a dartboard, and they were all falling off. No one was getting anyone. I was mentioning Catherine Crowe and Eleanor Smith, all these people that I'm very passionate about and I find absolutely fascinating, and nobody knew who they were. So it got me thinking about women in the paranormal, how, women have been there since the beginning. Really, if you think back, Catherine Crowe was one of, if not the first paranormal investigator. So I started thinking about, why is it that women aren't really remembered or thought of when we're talking about the paranormal? Even in today's day and age, you have TV shows that will have a woman on it every so often, but there's no shows that are all female, like you might have all male teams on TV. And if there ever is a woman on a show, she's always countered with a man, and a lot of times she is there as the more quote-unquote spiritual end of things. So she's a witch or she's a psychic, things like that. She's not necessarily an investigator. So it just got me thinking, and I decided that I wanted to try to undertake this new journal highlighting the works and the research and the investigations of women in the paranormal field. And my hope is that it just becomes a platform for women to share their findings, share their research, their theories, because I feel like so many times we do feel kind of overshadowed by either men on our teams or our counterparts, or we are just kind of ignored in general. I've had several friends that have been told that women are not valued nearly as much as men in the field, and they've been told this like directly to their faces, which I'm like, oh man, I'm glad that wasn't me, because I would have lost my mind. But you know, I have found that by I host different investigation nights, and I go to events, you know, when there's not a pandemic happening, and a lot of times I find that women make up the majority of these events and of the paranormal field. So why are we not being represented in the mainstream media? You know, I have theories about, you know, why we're not on TV nearly as much as men, but you know, that's why I wanted to start the Feminine Macabre. So Volume 1 is coming out hopefully next month, if everything goes according to plan. So March 2021 will be Volume 1 of the Feminine Macabre. We actually have Patty Negri. She's writing the foreword for Volume 1, so I'm really excited to have her. You know, I really admire her and her work. And it's including everything. It's ghosts, it's folklore, it's witchcraft and tarot, it's cryptids, it's cemetery art and funeral rites. Really anything that's, you know, strange and unusual is included in this journal. And it's going to be physically printed. A lot of people ask, is it going to be digital? Is it going to be an e-zine? But it's going to be in a book format, actually printed. And so I'm really, really excited about that. And then if anyone who is listening is interested in getting involved in the Feminine Macabre, obviously submissions for Volume 1 are already closed, but Volume 2, you know, we're looking to start another volume of it, which will come out probably August or September later this year. And, you know, feel free to send something in. All the submission guidelines are on my website, spookeats.com. And yeah, I don't care if you're not a part of a team, if you haven't been published before, if you don't have enough quote unquote experience. You know, we've gotten great responses already, and I'm really excited about it. So yeah, if anyone is listening and they, you know, identify as female, you know, I would love to hear from you. I would love to read what you're thinking. And this whole project is to give a voice to the women who feel like they've kind of been ignored and silenced over the years.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things I've often found peculiar, Amanda, because it seems that you can throw any kind of team of men together, regardless of any kind of supernatural subject, and it's fine. And like you say, there's usually a lady on who is often the psychic or the spiritualist or the witch. I've never really understood that, because as you refer to, I mean, Catherine Crowe is someone whose books I was reading 30 years ago. The Night Side of Nature, I think, is one of the best paranormal books of the 19th century by a long way.
Oh yeah.
I mean, there are some phenomenal stories and accounts in that book, and I've done an episode where we focused quite considerably on Catherine, because, like I say, she's a lady that for me is probably the most overlooked investigator in the modern paranormal field. Oh,
absolutely. And I have found that if people know about her, and that's a big if.
Yep.
If they know about her, a lot of times they know about that one night in Edinburgh when she was found naked, you know, walking up the street, and that's what she's remembered for, you know, as kind of like a crazy lady. And you just like want to scream and be like, there's so much more to her than that, literally that one day, that one night. So I appreciate that you help spread the word on Catherine Crowe, because she's one of those people that I find absolutely fascinating, and I really consider her to be like the mother of paranormal investigation, and not just for women, but for everyone. You know, I think the way that we look at the paranormal and we study the paranormal, you can trace it back to the night side of nature. So it's just, it drives me crazy when people, if they know about her, they always mention, wasn't she the lady that was walking around naked? And you go like, yes, she was. Moving on. Like, she did so much more than just that. So.
Absolutely. And like you referred to, she probably wrote about the first in-depth investigation into an alleged haunted house, which at that time nobody was really doing. Obviously, it was just before the explosion in spiritualism. So for a lot of people, it's that, I think there's a lot going on at this period of time when Catherine was releasing that book and her further investigations. I think it's one of those frustrating aspects of Catherine's life that I think if she was born 50 years later, she would probably be held up in massive regard in the modern era, I think, Amanda. And I think it's unfortunate that she seems to be a woman of circumstance primarily because she was born at the start of the 19th century rather than halfway through it.
Absolutely. I think it's, I hate like the term a woman ahead of her time, but she was.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think people didn't like that. So, you have people who slander her and kind of, speak ill of her. And unfortunately, that's what stuck. And not all of the hard work that she did in forging a path into paranormal research.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's often difficult because, as you refer to there, I think there are certain aspects of the supernatural where women are presumed to have more of an interest because, as you touch on there, what you're trying to do is pull everybody in from under this supernatural umbrella. So you're not sort of knocking anything off. It's free range. If anybody has an interest in whatever topic that comes under this banner, Amanda, they're welcome to apply and submit work for your appraisal, because one of the other aspects, I think, is another big love of mine, which is cryptozoology. And, with the greatest respect, you can probably count the number of well-known female cryptozoologists on one hand.
Probably, yeah. I mean, for me, the only one that I'm very confident in knowing is Mary Hyre.
Yeah.
You know, my contemporaries, women that are working in the field right now, I know of them.
Yes.
But historically speaking, you're very much correct that, again, I think if people know about anyone in the cryptozoology realm, 9 times out of 10, they're men.
Yeah. Which is odd because, once again, as a kid growing up, one of my favourite authors was a couple, which was Janet and Colin Board. And if you want to see how highly regarded their books are, try and find a second-hand copy on eBay for less than £300.
Oh my gosh.
So they wrote, as a writing duo, some of the most interesting and important books in the field of cryptozoology and weird animals throughout the 70s, 80s and 90s. And once again, I think that's another aspect of it that a lot of people don't, if it's not been released in the last 20 years or they've not been on television, they don't exist for a lot of people. And I think that's an aspect where what you're trying to create here and promote can only be good for that, because I think there are a lot of people that perhaps are reticent about coming forward, Amanda, and wanting to open themselves up for publication, because often there aren't the usual avenues, or they're once again kind of channeled into the usual fields. As we've touched on, it's all about witchcraft or psychics, and that's where it needs to be, and don't try and step out of your lane.
Absolutely. And it's been interesting seeing what women are submitting. We do have a lot of submissions on the spiritual end of things, using intuition and empathy on investigations, how to incorporate things like witchcraft into a scientific paranormal investigation. And then you also have one of my absolute favorite articles that someone sent in was a woman in her probably 40s or 50s. So she's been studying this. Her work that she cited in this article has dated back to 2000. So she's been working on this for over 20 years. And she said, this is the first time that she's really compiled something into a cohesive piece of literature that she can actually look at what she's accomplished in those 20 years. And I love it because I feel like, especially, at least on social media, and I get because it's social media, but it feels like the paranormal is all young people. You know, people in their 20s and 30s, and, you know, anyone over 40, you're too old for the paranormal. And that's not the case at all. That's not the case at all.
Thank God.
I feel like, but it's like, I'm loving seeing women who are more experienced and have spent, you know, possibly just as many years in the paranormal as some of these other women have been alive, really researching these things. And I feel like we can, you know, men and women can learn from, you know, these women and the experiences that they've had and the research that they've done. So it's been a great wide variety of people researching the spiritual end of the spectrum as well as the scientific end of the spectrum. And you have people who are very, very young, you know, in their early 20s, all the way up until, you know, their 50s and 60s that are submitting these reports and these articles and these stories, and learning from each other, which I just think like that's what the paranormal is all about. You know, if you're not constantly learning and constantly researching and debating and conversing, you're not doing it right. You know, you can't be so set in your ways that you can't learn from someone else, younger or older. And that's what I think the thing I've loved the most about this project.
Yeah, absolutely, because I think any aspect of life, once you decide that you know everything, you're in trouble.
Exactly.
And as I'm sure you're very aware of, Amanda, the supernatural field is not known for its collaborative abilities, shall we say, quite a lot of the time.
Yes.
Regardless of what field. Regardless of what aspect it is. As I say, I'm a lover of cryptozoology, so I'm fully aware of numerous camps. It's the same in ufology, it's the same in the paranormal. I don't think there's any aspect of this wonderfully weird subject that we love that doesn't have those kind of things. So I'm always very supportive of any kind of collaborative situation that pulls more people together rather than trying to get everybody fired up and create friction. I think the only way we'll learn more and get to the bottom of these mysteries and find out more information is by sharing and working together and switching ideas about and talking about these things in a respectful manner.
Yes, 100%. It's like, I love debating and having these conversations, and really, I always feel like my paranormal theories, it's a patchwork quilt from experiences and research and other people's experiences and theories, you know, all woven together into this weird, quirky mess that is my paranormal views. And so whenever, you know, you kind of like you get into contact with someone that is very regimented in their beliefs and, you know, this is what I believe and there's no, you know, moving me one way or the other. To me, it's a very foreign and strange idea because that's what I love about paranormal research is constantly, you know, learning new things and tweaking your ideas and, you know, so, you know, I think that the idea of para-unity, it's a nice idea, but I don't think it's as, I don't know, a common as we might think it is. So when we do encounter those individuals like yourself, like you helping me spread the word on the Feminine Macabre, I appreciate it more than you can possibly imagine because I've experienced those dead ends and those walls that people have put up and those cliques and those different niches that people just, they form naturally, and a lot of times you have a hard time kind of breaking in or breaking through to, you know, collaborate with these people and share ideas and share opinions. So I appreciate you.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I work on a principle of I don't give a damn about who you are or where you're from, or if I think you're an interesting person with a body of work that I appreciate and I enjoy, then I will want to speak to you on a variety of topics. It's as simple as that. You know, I class myself as an egalitarian, and if I didn't, my mother would give me a clip behind the ear. I can guarantee you of that. So, I mean, have you been surprised about the spread of the contributions you've received? I know you were touching on that earlier, Amanda, but has it surprised you of the subjects that people have put forward?
It has. has. Just because when I put this call out, I was kind of thinking, I might have to like pretend to be 12 different people and write 12 different things and produce it. And that's not the case. I swear it's not the case.
Okay.
But, it's been so interesting. And and I've told people that I take this very seriously, that when these women are sending in their articles and their pieces, I get that it's an insight into their heads and their hearts and their experiences. And I don't take that lightly. A lot of them have experienced prejudice and sexism and discrimination because they are women in the field. And so, I do take this very seriously, and as a big responsibility to take the time to read everyone's submissions and give it a fair chance of, actually making it in. And the fact that we've gotten submissions from, again, people from all walks of life, from all over the world. We've gotten obviously a lot of people from America. We've got people from Canada and New Zealand and Australia and Britain. It's been so widespread geographically speaking, and then the age group has been so wide, and the topics have been so interesting. Some women are choosing to really focus on the female aspect of women in the paranormal, whether that's their experiences of being a woman, or there was one article that I absolutely love that talks about women in white, or a lady in red, or the brown lady. So they take those, female spirits that are so prevalent everywhere you go and kind of dissects what does this mean culturally and historically. Fascinating. And then other women are choosing to not focus on the female aspect of things and just focus on the research and the work that they're doing. So it's been really interesting to see what the topic of women in the paranormal means to different women.
Yeah, and I suppose that would be pleasantly surprising that you would have such a variety of topics, because I would also imagine, Amanda, when you decide to do such an endeavour as this, there is often the concern that maybe it will all be too much of one specific thing, whereas when I've heard you mention about what you've got planned, you're not going to section this up. You're basically going to choose the articles or the contributions that you've chosen for this particular volume, and you're just going to put them in there. You're not going to do a ghost section, and you're not going to do a monster section. You're just going to put in the work that you feel is of sufficient quality to promote this field and the people who've contributed.
Yeah, so basically, because I was thinking, we could have like a cryptid section, we could have a witchcraft section, we could have, a folklore, a murder mystery section, and I realized that I didn't want to do that because, again, and I might be thinking too much into it, but the reasoning why I didn't want to do that was because so many times these women are brushed aside or kind of, ignored for one reason or the other. I don't want someone's piece to be ignored because it's not in a category that someone might find interesting. Someone who is buying this journal might only be interested in ghost stories. So they'll only read the ghost story section and ignore the cryptid section. Well, those women worked just as hard on their pieces, and they've done just as much research as the women in the ghost story section, and they deserve to be seen just as much. So I decided that I wanted to just kind of randomize it. If you want to get to the ghost story sections, you're going to have to go through the folklore and, the funeral rites and the cryptozoology and the witchcraft. And hopefully in the process, you might discover something that you find interesting. You might learn something new. So that was why I wanted to do that. Again, I might be looking way too into it, but that's my theory at least, and I'm going to stick with it.
No, I agree, and I think it should be applauded because, knowing myself, Amanda, there are, I'm a regular reader of the Fortean Times, which I'm sure I've often bored my listeners by mentioning numerous times. But I'm one of those people. I have a specific way I will read that magazine. I don't read it from front to back. I read it sort of back, middle, back, front, middle, back, and because there are certain sections in it that are my favourites, and I will always start with them and work my way through it. So it's good that you haven't thought, because I would suggest it was probably easier to categorise it, Amanda, than just basically put it in there and say, right, here you are, read it.
Yeah, and I found that, I've come up with 5 books on my own before, but it's always been my writing. So formatting it has always been very simple. With this, I'm formatting other people's writing. So it's been interesting trying to figure out, like, well, what should be first? What should be the halfway point? Well, you don't want to have 2 ghost stories right next to each other. You want to slip in a cemetery art or a cryptid right in there. Yes. So it's definitely been a juggling act of trying to find that perfect balance.
Absolutely. I would imagine it's like trying to plan a good meal, really. You're deciding, you don't want to, stuff people too early.
Exactly.
Excellent. And I think one of the other things that you should be applauded on, and I've heard you mention this before, I concur with your self-proclaimed weirdness about this, is that the fact that you're making it a physical book, because there's something, despite the fact that I have a Kindle, primarily to save my baggage allowance whenever I go on holiday, Amanda, because I'm usually lugging 3 or 4 books with me wherever I go. And I can't keep paying extra baggage just for a couple of books. So that was the main reason I bought a Kindle, was to save that. But there's something special about holding a book, whether it's a book that someone, as you say there, one of the contributors, it might be the first time they've ever been published in any kind of publication, regardless. And I think when it's a physical, tangible thing, rather not to dismiss anybody that writes a blog or a website or an e-zine or does a video, but there is something tangible about having something that you've contributed to that you can hold and cherish. And as you mentioned on a couple of interviews I've heard you over the last couple of years, smell.
Yes. It's so true, though. But I mean, 100%. This was why I wanted to make sure it was a published physical book, not just so you can sniff it and smell it. But that's a good reason why. But when I first started really considering writing as not necessarily a career, but, more than just a hobby and actually trying to be published, I started submitting into fictional anthologies. And I just remember the first time I got accepted into a horror anthology was for Halloween. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. It was serendipity. It meant the world to me. It was life-changing to have a book in my own 2 hands with my name on the cover and, have it sitting on my shelf, looking at me, my name on the spine. And it was a turning point for me where I realized, I could do this. I can write books. I can publish books. And my hope is that the Feminine Macabre is that starting point for someone else, that maybe they've dreamed of becoming published one day, but they haven't had the courage to do it, or it just hasn't worked out. The stars haven't aligned for them. So my hope is that when they get a copy of the Feminine Macabre and they see, their name on the cover and they, flip through the pages and they sniff the book, because you have to sniff the book, that it is that moment where they realize, I can do this. I can do this too. Why not me? And they start publishing and writing their own books as well. That is I would be thrilled if even just one person, one lady included in this anthology is inspired enough to take the chance, take the risk, and reap the rewards.
Absolutely. I think with anything, until you plant it, you never know what's going to grow.
Exactly. And I'm hoping that this is a seed that will kind of like burrow into their minds and, convince them that, they're capable and that they do have a voice and that people would be interested in hearing what they have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and obviously you're someone that not only writes your own books, I know you're a regular contributor for Haunted magazine.
Yes.
So has that allowed you to build up networks? Because I think often we forget in this modern era of immediate connection. Obviously we're talking across the Atlantic Ocean, as many people do these days when we do interviews or discussions, Amanda. Do you think that being able to write for a British-based magazine, which Haunted is, has allowed you to build up a quicker sort of reputation this side of the pond than it would do if you'd simply relied on your work coming out as a published author?
There is no doubt in my mind, yes. I don't know if I would have any sort of following over in the UK if it wasn't for Haunted magazine. I And I'm forever grateful because Paul from Haunted Magazine, he reached out to me about a month after I first started Spook Eats. How he heard about me, how he found me, I will never know. I have no idea. I was just this, random girl in New York writing blog posts about haunted restaurants. So I don't know how he found me. But he asked me if I would be interested in contributing something to be considered for the publication. And that was almost 3 years ago. And I've been writing ever since. I've been in every single issue since then. And I so appreciate the chance that they took on me, the fact that they still continue to include me, in the publication. It means so much. And, they always use the term Team Haunted. And it's more than that. For me, it definitely feels like this close-knit family of, there's probably about, 6 or 7 writers for Haunted Magazine that we write every single issue. There's something from us in there. And I attribute Haunted Magazine for connecting me with them. Would I have connected with these people organically one way or the other? Possibly. But it happened quicker because of Haunted Magazine. So I so appreciate Haunted Magazine. When I was over visiting back in 2019, I actually got to meet Paul, Mr. Haunted Magazine himself, in person. We met in Sherwood Forest, just because he lives in Nottingham, so I was like, well, let's meet in Sherwood Forest, and he was totally up for it. I appreciate them so much, and, I'm not just trying to butter them up and and suck up to them, but, I do thank them, and, the fact that I've been able to make so many connections and meet so many great people, over in Britain, I credit Haunted Magazine for introducing us.
Yeah, and I think they deserve a lot of credit, because in this day and age, to launch a new regular magazine that you can also, once again, get hold of a physical copy, in this day and age, is no small undertaking, Amanda, because especially in that particular field, because we've seen so many magazines over the years drop out, and I think the quality that Haunted Magazine has is the fact that it has such a rich palette of authors and contributors from across the world. I know there's yourself, Richard Estep's another regular contributor, a friend of somebody I've got to know through doing this show is Morgan Knudsen from Canada. So once again, it doing things like this has allowed me to connect with people who 5 years ago I used to see on TV, or I'd read a book of theirs, and now I get messages from them saying, when can I come back on the show, and things like that. So, or basically introducing me to, which I often am very humbled when somebody says, oh, by the way, this is Paul, I think you'd get on, and I'm like, okay, I'll just pinch myself. So I completely understand where you're coming from, because I think when you dip your toe in this kind of field, you always hope that someone appreciates what you do, regardless of what aspect you're applying yourself to, Amanda. And once it feels as though you've been accepted by whatever part of it, whatever portion, or somebody ever says, I really like what you do, I think it just gives you a real drive to continue to improve and keep moving forwards in that aspect, because you realise that what your passion is gives somebody else enjoyment, and that's all any of us want, really.
Yeah, it's almost like it gives you permission to continue to explore and be curious.
Yes, absolutely. For yourself, Amanda, obviously you've got this going on. You seem to have released 100 books in about a year. Not that I'm dismissing the quality of any of them, because it's a wonderful facet of your abilities. So, looking at your body of work, you've kind of done 2 guidebooks, essentially. You've done the Haunted Atlas of New York and the Spirit Guide, which is another interesting aspect. But you've also got the 2 fabulous children's books, which are the Krampus Great Big Book of Yuletide Monsters, and also the Cryptid ABC book.
Yes.
I find that very interesting because I think often when you're writing for the paranormal, it's very easy to simply focus on being an adult author. And I certainly don't mean that dismissively in regards to the children's work, because children's books is usually the easiest way we can hook these people and get them into these things.
You can say brainwash them when they're little.
Well, you can say that, I can't.
No, but that was one of the reasons why I wanted to do a couple of children's books. Was when I was a kid, there really wasn't a lot of kids' books highlighting these topics. So when I was 9 or 10 years old, I was taking out books intended for adults on cryptids and aliens. So a lot of it went way over my head. So my hope is, I called them creepy books for creepy kids to warn parents that depending on, like, look at your kid and see if they'll actually enjoy these things. So far I haven't gotten any complaints, so that's good. But just a way to kind of introduce the paranormal and that darker side of the holidays or cryptids to kids. Because I know I was looking for these kinds of books when I was little, and I'm sure nowadays just as many kids are looking for these types of books to read.
Absolutely. I think it's very interesting because I'm slightly older than yourself. So I remember as a kid, we had a whole range of books, the wonderful Usborns, which have suddenly had a cult resurgence, Amanda, and I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure of catching hold of a copy of them, but these were books that were basically brought out at the end of the 1970s, which were ghosts, monsters and UFOs, and they were done for kids. And I cannot honestly tell you the excitement I felt a couple of years ago when they re-released the Ghosts book that had originally come out in 1977. And I can still remember some of the pictures and the stories 40 years on, and the excitement I felt as an adult getting that book dropped through my letterbox, Amanda. It just took me somewhere I never thought a kid's book could ever take me as a middle-aged man.
And that's something that's so lacking, I feel, here in the States. Because I remember Haunted Magazine did a huge issue when these books were coming back out. And I was looking at this and I was like, where was this? Where was this when I was looking for books like this? So, and I'm hoping to like get my hands on a copy. If not for me, then for baby Spook Eats. And then I'll just sneak reading it when he's not looking.
I recommend them highly. There's stuff in them that still stands up today, and I mean the UFOs one always makes me laugh because I used to dream of the Hopkinsville goblins that were on the front cover and things like that, but the ghost ones, it really was like a trip back in time. And I still remember a picture of a smoke ghost from ancient Greece and a hung highwayman wandering around near the gibbet where his body lay, and things like that. And you're thinking, how has this stayed in my mind for so long?
Yeah. Oh, it's fantastic.
So, in other aspects of that, after your concurrent brainwashing schedule that you've got going on there for kids, which I thoroughly applaud and support, your most recent release is more of a charitable endeavour, which is supporting one of your local theatres, I believe.
Yeah, so I came out with the Ghosts of the Ghostlight Theatre. So the Ghostlight Theatre is a local community theater here in Western New York. I've actually been a member since 2005, so just a few years now. But it's one of those locations it's always been very special to me. My whole family, we were members. We still are members technically, even though COVID has kind of shut their doors right now. But for me, once COVID hit and I saw how badly this theater was being affected by it, I mean, they were pretty close to having to shut their doors for good and sell the place. And for me, that would not do. I just couldn't let that happen. Personally for me, I've had tons of experiences there over the years, because all theaters are haunted. So, I'm convinced that the place is haunted. I've experienced things and seen things over the years that I can't explain. And after my brother passed away in 2015, I had experiences with him there. There was a time where I saw him. I've heard his voice. We We've gotten photographs of him. So for me, I feel a very deep connection to that theater, and it is a sort of connection to my brother. Even though he's not physically here anymore, I do feel like when I step foot into this theater, it's almost like walking into his arms, like a hug from him. So for me, I wanted to do whatever I could to try to make sure that they are able to stay open. So the Ghost of the Ghostlight Theater is over 100 first-hand accounts from people who, they're cast members, they're crew members, and even audience members. And it ranges from, people hearing things to feeling like their clothes being tugged on or fingers through their hair. We've got photographs, both historically, we have old photos from the 1920s and 1930s of the building and what used to be the congregation, because it was originally a church. So there's like a great little history section. We also have photographs of some of the spirits that we think are inside that have been captured over the years. It's just a great range of different paranormal encounters, and it ranges it goes back to 2001 when they first got the building, so it's been 20 years since they've moved in, and 100% of the proceeds are going right back to the theater. So I don't take any of the money. I took it all as I'm donating my time formatting this and putting it all together. So if anyone is interested, it's available on Amazon. It's The Ghosts of the Ghostlight Theater. And again, all of the money goes right back to the theater. So far, we've raised almost $2,000 for them just through sales from this book. And it's huge. It sounds cheesy, but every little bit does help. It helps to keep this historic place, alive, even despite a pandemic.
Absolutely, and it is a stunning building as well. There's something captivating about it, and I know I've seen several pictures of it in different light, and it's one of those places, it just exudes something different about it. And I think when you've got a focal point in the local community, often when it comes to things like the theatre, Amanda, people will often poo-poo it, but I think anything that kind of creates a local network for kids to get involved, because sometimes the kids that are attracted to theatre are often ostracised or don't have the opportunities in other expected walks of life, and I think by supporting and keeping establishments like this open, it offers more choice for kids growing up to give them a real feel of who they can be as people.
Oh, absolutely. And it's, this theater it's really an anchor in this this community, this small town. I know that the neighbors of the theater, they could very easily hate it, yes, whenever it's a Friday night and there's a show going on and there's no parking anywhere. But they embrace it. They love it. They look out for it, and, as you were describing, seeing images of the theater in different angles and different light, it really, I always joke saying it's a character in and of itself. There are some times where you walk in and it's light and it's happy and fresh. There's other times where it's kind of darker and gloomy, and it's got a life of its own, and it's got this beautiful energy. And I think because for 100 and some odd years, I think it was 110 years, it was a church. Yeah. So you had people born there, getting married there, dying there. You had all of this energy, people coming and going over the years, and now it's a theater. And the energy that the actors exude in their roles, that creates something that lasts, and the audience, whether they're clapping, they're crying, they're screaming, however they're reacting to it, that's also creating something. So it's this beautiful spider web of energy in this place that is just so alive, and it's a shame to see it empty right now. But I've been saying that with the publication of The Ghost of the Ghostlight Theater, as long as the building stays the Ghostlight Theater, and once this is all over, it can reopen, I'm happy. So the fact that it's closed right now and it's dark and it's empty, it breaks my heart, because it's always been filled with people since it's been built. It's never been empty. As long as there comes a time when we can fill it with people once more, that's fine. I'm willing to wait.
And as you touched on earlier on when you were discussing the Feminine Macabre, I believe does it have a lady in red in residence?
It does have a lady in red.
Good. I'm glad I got that right.
That was very good.
Yeah, but I mean, it is one of those things, and like you say, I suppose as well, because it has had a reputation, because I think a few paranormal investigations have gone on there before it sort of fell under your gaze, but as someone that used it as part of the theatre, Amanda, it's obviously something that's built a real reputation up because of its former life as a Methodist church.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating because I do believe that it's haunted. Obviously, I wouldn't be talking about it if I didn't. And, when we talk about the different spirits that we believe are inside, it's so interesting to me because there are a few that we've kind of pinpointed to at least an era of history. So the lady in red, she's dressed in, turn of the 20th century clothes. She's been described that way many times. There's also a little girl named Mary that wears an old-fashioned dress. So we have some of these spirits that are older, 100, 110 years old. And then you actually have several spirits there. Like I mentioned, my brother. There's another gentleman there that passed away in 2017. These are people who were members of the theater group, people that we knew personally. And people have seen them over the years. They've heard them. They've photographed them. So it's very interesting that you have spirits that are over 100 years old, but then also only a few years old. And they're all kind of just mingling together, hanging out. And it's just really interesting to me because so many times you don't hear about quote unquote modern day ghosts or spirits. They're always Victorian or very old fashioned, several hundreds of years old. You don't have any disco ghosts or you don't usually find those. So yeah. I always think it's really interesting that you do have that variety of people that the building was important to them, either as a church or as the theater, and for whatever reason, they either choose to remain there or they pop in from time to time. So I just find it really interesting and very heartwarming and welcoming.
Yeah, well, that's always important, and like you say, I think it's a real touchstone for the community, and all power to you for wanting to support it and keep it going in these difficult times, which is something that should be applauded. And like you say, it is interesting, as you touch on there, as a bit of a humorous aside, that it is weird how certain eras don't seem to generate more hauntings, because I'm sure many people would laugh at the fact that many people used to say disco will never die, and yet we don't seem to have many ghosts that congregate from the 70s at all. They all seem to have jumped around a bit, and it's the same over here, that I think often a lot of them are Victorian or turn of the 20th century ghosts. So anything that's a more modern kind of haunting, I suppose, is quite refreshing, really.
Right, it always makes you stop and notice and start asking questions why is this happening? Where are the disco ghosts?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Where are they? I think that's a good subject for that could be a good title.
Yeah, right?
Where are the disco ghosts? That's your next project, man.
There it is.
I'm sure, if you've not got enough to juggle at the moment.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today. It's been lovely to finally get an opportunity to speak to you. As I said before we went on air, you're somebody I've been aware of for a while. Really appreciate and enjoy your work. Where can everybody get hold of you in regards to the website, and if they want to proceed and participate in your second Journal of the Feminine Macabre?
So my website is spookeats.com. It's nice and easy. And all the submission guidelines are right at the top of the page under the Feminine Macabre. You can click on that, kind of read through the word count, rules on, how to submit, where to submit. And if anyone is on social media and is interested in following along, I am on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter as well, all under Spook Eats. Again, nice and easy. It's all the same. And I just want to encourage, anyone who's listening that is, thinking or considering about submitting something for Volume 2 of the Feminine Macabre, don't hesitate, don't think about it, just give it a go, give it a shot. I look forward to reading what you create. And you, Paul, I just want to thank you so much for having me on, helping to spread the word, because this would be nothing if it wasn't for people like you helping us get the word out.
Absolutely. And make sure those contributions are between 500 and 5,000 words, I believe.
Yes.
Let's not swamp you too much. So,
yeah.
All your books are available on Amazon, I believe. So there's 5 available right now, including the Ghost of the Ghostlight Theatre and Your Haunted Atlas and the Spirit Guide, as well as the 2 children's books.
Yes, correct.
fabulous, and I recommend them all heartily. And if you want your children brainwashing at an early age, both Amanda's children's books are highly recommended. So, Amanda, what's next other than this journal, or is it just a case of holding fire now and waiting for things to get slightly normal again for us later this year, and you have plans to get back out and do some more investigating?
Oh gosh, I hope so. I'm starting to go a little stir crazy. I have like all these great plans of a New Orleans trip and writing about New Orleans, and a Route 66 trip guide to write about the haunted restaurants and bars along Route 66. But until COVID comes, it's kind of just waiting and see, work on the Feminine Macabre. Got a few other books in the works. So, but hopefully I can get out and start traveling again soon.
Oh, well, fabulous, and all power to you. Like I say, thank you again for your time. You are always welcome to rejoin us here on Mysteries and Monsters, and I always look forward to see what you've got coming up. And I can't wait to see the first collection of the Feminine Macabre, which should be out this side of Easter. So I just want to wish you the very best of luck with it, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.